Okay. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you so much, Obaye. That was such a touching introduction. And you really is a critical discourse analyst. Like, you've analyzed in 3 different perspectives. I didn't know ChatGPT has done such a good job. Yeah, amazing. Okay, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming to my talk. And I'm really honored to be here. I spent a few days in Dhaka and Bangladesh so far. What a beautiful country. What a beautiful culture. I'm just so impressed. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is one of the really best organized conferences I ever been to in my life. And I've been to many conferences. Yeah. I've organized a social linguistic symposium conference in Perth last June. And that puts me into shame, because comparing to conferences, it's just completely different world. So Shaila, the chair of the conference, you've done such a great job. Congratulations, Shaila. Okay, so today I'll be talking about this topic, psychological damages of the linguistic racism. I will talk about the reflections, the reform, and the language education in the Global South. So before I do that, I briefly want to pay my respect to the traditional owners of the unceded lands and waters in which Curtin University is located. This is the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. So I'm paying my respect because this is the land where I live and work, and this is the land where I have prepared this presentation. Now, as a researcher with a migrant background, I take my inspirations from this, one of the oldest knowledge systems in the world, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge system. And I think it's very important for to positionalize your position as a researcher, especially in a decolonial practice in applied linguistics. It's very important for us who we are as a researcher, what we do, and our background. So my background is I was born and raised in Mongolia. This is my native land. So I would like to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and future of my land. Now, as a researcher with a migrant background who left Mongolia as a young girl and migrated to Australia, I take my inspirations from one of the last nomadic surviving knowledge systems in the world. If you go to Mongolia, you will see all of this, still untouched, still nomadic people. So I take a lot of inspirations from that. Oh, thank you. And also I would like to acknowledge my research participants. Some of the slides are used for my multiple research projects. I would also like to thank my colleagues around the world, students around the world, and also in Australia. And I also would like to acknowledge this work of all the artists who have contributed, photographers, to these slides. Okay, next. There is a warning because some of the images and contents of these slides might be disturbing for you. So I would like to apologize for that. And if it makes you upset, of course, please, this is just a research, fact-based research. Yeah. All right, so today I'll be talking about, of course, linguistic racism. However, we need to just pause and think about what is ism, right? Ism, social oppression, social prejudice, discrimination. We have ageism, ableism, sexism, racism, even sizeism, and all of that. So in humanities and in social science, we have studied a lot about ableism, about sexism, about racism, and all of that, right? So we know basically what is ism. So basically it's a social oppression, social prejudice. However, when we talk about linguistic racism, it turns out that it's one of the least explored areas in the humanities and social science. People talk, we communicate. As soon as we open our mouth, we say something, we utter something. And it's basically about what you say is who you are. However, this has not been studied a lot in terms of linguistic discrimination, linguicism, or linguistic racism. So as applied linguists, as we are all together here sitting in this room, we will focus on linguistic racism. What do I mean by linguistic racism? So we have been using this tree of life a lot in this conference. We have that tree, and I saw Suresh's, is Suresh here? Oh, hi. Suresh's presentation that he was using the tree of life a lot. So this is my tree of life. So it's called linguistic racism. Linguistic racism is basically understanding language in terms of race and in terms of racism. So race and racism and language, right? So that is linguistic racism. Now, linguistic racism, this tree of life has many different branches. You can see racial linguistics, linguistic stereotyping, native speaker saviorism, what else? Unequal Englishes, tonism, dialectism, all of these terms. It's coming out in the last decade or so in applied linguistics. So applied linguists are seeking to sort of, advocating for linguistic justice, and all of these different terms very much have the similar ideas and concepts in terms of linguistic racism. So, what is linguistic racism? Some of the key works in terms of understanding language and race and linguistic racism. Linguistic racism is basically the language users and individuals, when they talk, they get discriminated, marginalized based on how they talk, what kind of accents they use, what kind of dialects they use, vernaculars they use. Also, even the tone of the voice, body language, it can be discriminated. So that is linguistic racism, and it is a basic human rights violation because people are expected to speak how they want to, but you still get discriminated. So basically, linguistic racism is language-based discrimination, but it's not only the language, it's about everything. So we will go through that in my presentation. Linguistic racism is a global pandemic, in my opinion. It's not only happening in, in specific countries. I would say it's a global pandemic. Why? As Robert Phillipson in our keynote, he basically said that linguicism or language-based discrimination is basically, it's a global pandemic. It's everywhere. But he also specifically talked about indigenous people, right? Indigenous people. So here, this is my culture, Mongolian culture. This is an indigenous population in Mongolia. They are called reindeer people, Tsatan people in Mongolian language, right? So their language, Dukan language, is violated by the standard Mongolian. So they are not allowed to speak or use their Dukan language. These languages basically dying. So standard Mongolian is basically dominating these people's language, which is very sad. Robert Phillipson also was talking about ethnic minorities, not indigenous, ethnic minorities. So in Mongolia, we have Kazakh people as an ethnic minority. Their religion is Muslim, and they speak Kazakh language, and their basic human right is violated by standard Mongolian as well. So indigenous people, ethnic minorities, and also in terms of Mongolia, when you talk about the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, Mongolia was a satellite of the Soviet Union for 70 years, right? So the countries which belonged to Soviet Union, they were colonized by the Russian language, right? So here, that's Genghis Khan, the modern Mongolia. So Mongolia was a country which was sort of like became a nation state. It was like this tribal nomadic tribes everywhere in the Central Asia. Genghis Khan was born. He united everyone, and he named it as Mongolia. So he's the founding father of Mongolia. And when he established Mongolia, he also standardized Mongolian oral language into Mongolian written language, which is the old script called Mongolian classic script called Uyghur. And then it was also in the 1940s, it was colonized by Russia. So Mongolian old classic script is now replaced by the Russian Cyrillics, as you can see here. And we still use it as a standard Mongolian orthography nowadays. Irony is that when English became so popular in Mongolia, the young people, social media users started using Romanized English Mongolian. Now we are being colonized by English. We don't want to use any English or Romanized English. And we forgot about the colonial legacy of Cyrillics because the purists want to keep it as it is. So this is the irony going along, transgenerational irony, I guess. Now, today we are all English language teachers, English language students, applied linguists, right? So I'm going to concentrate on English today in my presentation. We have 1.3 billion people, English speakers around the world, apparently. And then 370 million are native English speakers. So native English speaker means that you have the birthright to English. You were born in English-speaking country, so you have a birthright, you're a native English speaker, which is also quite ironic because, anybody can be native or non-native. But these 370 million native English speakers, they mostly live around the Anglophone countries such as USA, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, right? Now, there's this dark color there because these native English speakers seems to be majority of them are monolingual, right? Monolingual means that I know how to speak English. I know English. I don't need to learn another language. I just, English is just, just enough. So, whereas the rest of the English speakers, as you can see there, are translanguagers. So, translanguager means that you are you're exposed to different linguistic repertoires. You're exposed to different semiotic repertoires. You have access to social media, you have access to everything, and then you become an English speaker, but you are a translanguager. You're not a native English speaker. But if you just, see the contrast here, translanguages are very colorful, right? However, the saddest thing is that English translanguages are the victims of the linguistic racism. So they are the victims of the nativism. And there's a big tension between standard English, non-standard English. So translanguagers are the victims, and the standard English, native English speakers are the colonizers, right? So I'm a translanguager, obviously, because my first language is Mongolian, and I moved to Australia, so I see myself as a translanguager all the time. I don't see myself as a monolingual or multilingual. I see myself as a translanguager because I have been telling this story in my multiple times before because when I try to, for example, present in Mongolian language, academic huge presentations like this, it doesn't work for me because I don't have the access to academic Mongolian because I left Mongolia quite early, right? But then when I speak just Mongolian to an ordinary people, it's fine. Whereas when I speak English in Australia, my academic English is okay. I write in, papers in academic English. However, when I speak to ordinary Australians, they always ask me, how did you learn English so well? Or, you have an accent, where are you from? And things like that. So this is the true example of me being a translanguager, right? All right, so where is this linguistic racism that the ideology is based? It's basically based on linguistic purity. You remember Master Frankensteiner, right? So Frankensteiner is basically, he's created by the human body parts, right? So he becomes a monster. So if English is being contaminated and violated by different human accents, dialects, different human activities, it becomes a monster. So we don't want that. We wanted to keep it as pure as it is. So this ideology of linguistic purity is the bottom of all of this happening. Not only English, right? It happens in many countries. So, yeah, this is the ideology of linguistic purity. Language needs to be kept clean, sterile. So that is the safety. So main question of the linguistic racism is, what color is your English? So that means that it's always related to race. As soon as you open your mouth, it's related to some sort of race. There's this very interesting research, experimental research. It's a classic research which was made in the 1980s from Rubin and his colleague at Florida University. So they showed these two different photos of the Asian woman and Caucasian woman, and then they played the Native American English speakers lecture to the students. And then they had a survey later, and they asked whose lecture was more comprehensible, whose lecture was more understandable. So students said the Asian one was very hard to comprehend, the Asian one was very hard to follow, whereas the Caucasian one was normal, standard, easy to follow. As you can see, what color is your English? As soon as you see the color, then it becomes a completely different story, right? The types of linguistic racism starts with the accentism. Accentism means that you are discriminated based on how you speak English, based on your accent. So we call it ethnic accents as well, ethnic accentisms as well. So here, my research participant from Vietnam, she moved to Australia when she was 13, and she came to the classroom and she said, I mispronounced something differently, and they burst into a laugh. And I feel like maybe I should shut my mouth and say nothing at all. She has a Vietnamized accented English, and then, of course, she becomes a laughingstock in the classroom. So we call it accent hallucination. Accent hallucination means as soon as they see you as a Latino, Japanese, Chinese, Jew, Spanish, they will color your English. They would add different colors to your English, and you start hallucinating accents in your head, right? Next thing here, Ilhan, she's Syrian. She was born in Australia. Her English is Australian English. However, she wears a hijab. She wears her Syrian traditional, beautiful, gorgeous outfit. And then when she speaks to the people often thinks that she has an accent, right? Or they say, oh, your English is so good. Where did you learn it? So this happens no matter what. Even if your English is your first language, you still get the linguistic racism. Accent hierarchies. Jan Bloemert, he said here, Asian accents such as Indian, Korean, Japanese, they seem to be at the bottom level of the pyramid, the bottom level of the hierarchies. Whereas French accented English, Italian accented English, all this white accented English seems to be considered as cute, romantic, sexy, and so on. So accent is actually not really about accentism. It's also based on the color of your skin. Next, dialectism. Dialectism here. Here I'm working with the Australian Aboriginal kids in Australia, and I love them. They're so gorgeous, and I love working with them. I love spending time with them. Their language is amazing. They speak Australian Aboriginal English. They speak dialects, right? So the dialect means that they speak Creole, traditional languages, standard Australian English, all this mixture. And they're amazing, they have this really long, tradition, and the identity root is just amazing. Anyway, so these kids' dialects have been colonized before, of course, and now there's a new colonial lingualism happening. They don't want to hear the dialect of how they speak. They want only standard Australian English. So the assessments at school, linguistic assessments, and not only the linguistic assessments, are all based on standard Australian English. So how are we going to assess these children who are speaking dialects? So it's just beyond my, beyond my belief. I don't know how that's going to work. Another one, African American English dialects. Another, linguistically racist approach. Here in Oakland's Ebonics, some say gibberish, some say slang, some say distant them, me say dim them, it be my mother tongue. So that's how the African American English speakers speak. But then it's called gibberish, not English. But for her, it's her mother tongue. Next one is Nameism. William Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. William Shakespeare was right. Someone's name is very sweet like a rose. But what he really is saying is that name has a lot of people's identity, inner quality, inner strengths, and all of that. Name has a lot of, meanings. Now, in Australian context, as soon as you have an ethnic name, for example, Mongolian name, you need to have an English name to comfort the Anglo ears, to comfort the Anglo mouth, because it's not, it's very hard, right? It's very hard to pronounce. So, my Chinese students come to me and they say, I ask them, what's your name? And they say, oh, just call me Lucy. Oh, just call me Andy. And I say, no, what's your Chinese name? The real birth name. And they say, oh, you don't want to hear, it's fine. So I tell them always, no, I would really like to learn your Chinese name because it's got a beautiful cultural significance and meanings. So I always try to encourage that. And now here, another research here, 36% of Asian and African American candidates interviewed by the researchers said they whiten their CVs and resumes because 2/3 report knowing someone who does. So this means that as soon as the employers see the ethnic names, they don't even look at it. They just pass it. So you need to anglicize and whiten your name. From me, Sandra Dovchin, maybe, I don't know, Sandra, right? So that's very common in Australia. So here, my Ukrainian participant, Oksana, she's saying that when she first came to Australia, her name sounded very Soviet, right? Post-Soviet. And she was applying for jobs and she didn't hear anything from the employers. She was married to an Australian man and changed her name into an Anglo name. Now she hears from the recruiters. So that was very sort of like present in my research. Now, we should look at the linguistic racism and intersectionality. We all know that Leonardo da Vinci, he always encouraged us to learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. He was a visionary. He reminded us we need to look at everything from interdisciplinary perspective, and linguistic racism should be understood from its intersectionality. Here, my colleague Pramod, where is Pramod? Yeah. So he is one of your invited speakers. He is doing a special issue in the journal called Urban Education with his colleague Hussein Yusa. And he invited me to contribute a paper. It pushed my boundary. I had to think a lot, have to sort of, understand linguistic racism and its intersectionality. Here's the result. Being female is one of the, being female means, you will be the victim of the sexism in Australia. Being pregnant is not only sexism, but also ableism. Being Asian or Mongolian doesn't help because you become the victim of the racism and ethnicism. Being a translanguager, it doesn't help because you're not a monolingual standard native English speaker, you're a translanguager. All of these are mixed together and you become the victim of the linguistic racism. She was applying for a job, and because she was pregnant, because she was Mongolian, because she was female, and because she was Asian, she didn't get the job. So, so linguistic racism has this pyramid, right? And it's all about the intersectionality. Now here, Suresh Kanagaraja, in his keynote speech, he talked about crypt translingualism. He introduced the term to us. So in crypt translingualism, we talk a lot about ableism, being able person, being disabled person, and so forth. So in that one, we talk about the deficit narratives and creep linguistics. It means that you are discriminated based on your body functioning, based on your ability, and so forth, right? So being a victim of the linguistic racism or being an accented speaker or being a dialect speaker means, here, I quote Kanagaraja Suresh, an example where African American vernacular English was considered ungrammatical and the speakers of this English were cognitively deficient. The uninflected B form caused by some psycholinguists to believe that these speakers did not possess the mental capacity for abstract grammatical concepts. So that's the deficit narrative of the victims of the linguistic racism. In my paper, one of the Mongolian kids went to Australia and attended the school. He was asked to attend the speech therapist. They didn't understand that, he needed to learn English properly. They thought he had a problem with his speech. And also, if you're a translanguager, there is this tendency that you are less intelligent and slower compared to the native speaker. This is the deficit narratives or the creep linguistics has been arguing. You do not discriminate people based on how they speak English, proficiency, ability, and fluency, right? Next. Now, so I talked about the types of linguistic racism, accentism, dialectism, Nameism, and the deficit narratives related to that. Now we will learn a little bit about how linguistic racism is conveyed and communicated. Now, this is the documentary. It was an investigative journalism by ABC, the Australian broadcaster. It's called Australia's Shame. Our Australian Aboriginal young people were locked up for many months or for even many years for just little crimes such as stealing or graffiti. They have been beaten. They have been strangled to chair naked. They have been violently sprayed with water. So the investigative journalism has revealed what happened to these Aboriginal children. You can watch this documentary if you're interested. It's an ABC publicly free. And here is Dylan. He's an Aboriginal young man. He was locked up in that youth detention center for a few years. He was the one who was abused, beaten a lot. So what he's saying here is, I will play this video from here.
For our crime is our punishment, not the continued mental and physical abuse that we continue to cop while we're here. On a number of occasions, I've witnessed officers abusing and yelling at Aboriginal men in here and putting them down because they can't speak English properly, and that's not fair and needs to stop. As a victim and a young man, I feel upset and let down by the system that these bad things were allowed to go on for so long. I really want to see these things change so it never happens to anyone else again, and I believe this Royal Commission makes sure that young people need love and someone to talk to, not to be locked in a cell with nothing for days on end. Trust me.
So this is the Royal Commission, and he's making a statement. Young people were locked up, beaten, and abused physically because Aboriginal young men were abused by prison officers because they could not speak English properly.
For our crime is our punishment, not the...
So linguistic racism can be conveyed as physically violent. So physical violence is one of the communication of linguistic racism. Polish man was killed because he was speaking Polish in England a few years ago, for example. Linguistic racism can be verbally violent too, in the public transport, in the shopping centers, everywhere in an interpersonal communication. Explicit swear, explicit grotesque expressions are directed at people of color or the victims. Even here in Australian Parliament, in Australian politics, we have linguistic racism, verbal violence. Here, Pauline Hanson is one of the Senate members of Australia. So she tweeted in social media in response to another Senate member, Mahrin Faruqi. Mahran is from Afghanistan, refugee background Senate politician. And when Queen died, she said on Twitter, well, condolence to those who knew the Queen. I cannot mourn the leader of the racist empire built on stolen lives, land and wealth of colonized peoples. We are reminded of the urgency of treaty with First Nations, justice and the reparations of British colonies and becoming a republic. And then Pauline Hanson got very angry. What she said was, well, your attitude appalls and disgusts me. When you immigrated to Australia, you took every advantage of this country. You took citizenship, bought multiple homes, job in a parliament. It's clear you're not happy, so pack your bags and peace off back to Pakistan. So this has happened, but there was the consequences. Recently, the state judge penalized Pauline Hanson for being racist, linguistically racist. So linguistic racism now being institutionalized up in the Supreme Court. So that's the good news. So she was penalized, but I don't think she's locked up yet, right? I'm not sure how this story is continuing. Next, symbolic violence. Symbolic violence is, you smile. Yeah, I'm your friend, right? I'm your friend. You did nothing wrong. But you still have accent. So that's the symbolic violence. You have questions such as, are you sure you're not just being overly sensitive? I'm sure he didn't mean that. Don't worry. Or you shouldn't let those things bother you. Or the question is, okay, where are you really from? I know you speak really fluent English, but where are you really from? Or your English is so good, right? So these are the symbolically violent, subtle way of communicating linguistic racism. Here, yesterday, Pramod's talk, he was also talking about symbolic violence, about how narratives have been presented to us, also violated symbolically. So I agree with that, and this is part of the linguistic racism as well. Also, linguistic racism can symbolically happen in linguistic landscapes, in public spaces and graffitis, right? We've known a lot of examples against during the COVID time, and it recently happened during the US presidential elections. So this is also the communication of linguistic racism, symbolically in linguistic landscape. All right, now I have defined what is linguistic racism. I have talked about how it is communicated, what types of linguistic racism. Now I'll talk about the psychological damage of the linguistic racism. The first in our data comes out the idea of inferiority complex. Linguistic inferiority complex means you are so ashamed of yourself. You lose your confidence, sense of belonging. And then you think that you're not good anymore, right? Accumulation of all these everyday microaggressions will make you think that you are not as good as the native English speaker. You think that you're just inferior human being or the second citizen. So that is the linguistic inferiority complex that my research participants have been telling me. Sense of shame, sense of non-belonging, no confidence, right? All of these things. There is also a lot of trauma-related issues coming out from linguistic racism. Micro and macro. They have a withdrawal syndromes, fear and anxiety. They have flashbacks. They have sleep changes, shame and guilt, hypervigilance. These are all part of the trauma. Linguistic racism can cause trauma. This accumulation of all of this trauma and all of this accumulation of linguistic inferiority complex, it's a psychological damage, but it becomes the physical, poor health and physical behavior as well. Some of the examples here, the story of the weeping woman. It's actually the Bangladeshi women. I learned this from Shaila's works. When they are together, especially when you're a female and become a victim of the linguistic racism, you sit together and cry, right? So crying, being shameful, all of this, crying as communication. Translanguaging emotionality, English as a second language immigrants. In my article, I was arguing that Mongolian women are deeply depressed because of, all this norm of trying to speak standard English and purify the English, right? So they become totally devastated. Now, most disturbing one is, you can see here, where is that? Number 3, line number 3. I felt like I really lost in that environment. It was a time I thought of depression. I wanted to kill myself back then, my Vietnamese participant. So suicidal ideation, it is that harmful. Another participant from China, Wang, you can see in number 12, line 12. Yes, and I talked to another friend who had depression before. He kind of talked me out of it. I was already going to have a bottle of pesticide by my side. So that is the suicidal ideation. We have to take it seriously. How do we combat linguistic racism? That is another research big gap in applied linguistic research. There is not many research about how to combat linguistic racism. There are some research, what is linguistic racism, what we're going to do, how it is conveyed, but there is not much research combating linguistic racism. And this is where I'm going to talk about the reflection and reform and the global South. In my latest book with Rhonda Oliver and Leeway, I talk about linguistic racism, about playfulness and precarity, and what we can do as applied linguists. I'm not going to talk about many strategies to combat linguistic racism. I've got only 2 ideas. The first one is, I have been talking about it before, ordinariness. What is ordinariness? Staying with our ordinariness allows us to recognize the ordinariness of others. It is in this recognition that a real humanity becomes possible. I will unpack this idea of ordinariness a little bit now. We as Homo sapiens, as Higgins and Cohen argue, we accept that as Homo sapiens, we are all in the same in terms of genetic structure and cognitive potentiality. We all have same brains. We all have same body structure, right? However, beyond that, we do not think that as humans, as we have anything in common but our differences, creativity, and diversity. But that is ordinary. That is ordinary. Bakhtin, in his famous work, Language in the Marketplace, he was saying that, he was a visionist. He was saying that, look, in the language of in the marketplace, we have different people from every villages, every rural areas or city. They laugh, they make jokes, they tease each other. It's a very happy place. Carnivask place, right? Carnivask. People, Carnivask means that people are happy, everything is happening in the marketplace. That's the multivocality and heteroglossia. However, Bakhtin also said that there is a grotesque voices, grotesque realities. People get angry. People hate each other. They fight. They swear. So all this different multivocality and heteroglossia is ordinary. This is part of who we are as humans, right? So here, Stephen May yesterday, he reminded in his talk that in imperial times, the multilingualism has always been there. Chinese, Tibetan, Uyghur, and Qin Empire. So that's part of the ordinariness. We should not be exoticizing, oh, multilingualism, translanguaging is so exotic and we need to celebrate that. No, it has always been there. It's ordinary. It's part of who we are as humans. Here, Pramod was also talking about it, pre-colonial language practice in the Indian subcontinent. Plural, in Sanskrit language was a lingua franca, but then there was also many other dialects and language, right? I hope I'm interpreting it right. So these, you see the keynote speakers are all reminding us that multilingualism has always been there. It's ordinary human practice. Do not romanticize or celebrate it, because that becomes something unordinary. And our next keynote speaker, Alistair Pennycook, this afternoon, my mentor and my Shaila's mentor as well, he said that it's about the same item being different and understanding of difference as the norm with the sameness as in need of explanation. So same item being different, different item being same. We went to around Dhaka yesterday. Thank you so much for taking us around Dhaka. Couple of hours, so we managed to take some graffitis in the city near the Dhaka University. We have some of the graffitis was done by the revolutionists. So this one really touched my heart because my guide, where is he? There you go. He explained to me that this one means that people can have different religions, but at the end, when they die, they're all the same and ordinary. They all become skulls. So why the need of all this confrontation, right? That's the part of the ordinariness. Why all this hate? Why all this discrimination if we end up all like this? So Heraclitus, we step and we do not step into the same rivers. We are and we are not. So this is something also to think about. Next one is for me, resilience is very important, especially as applied linguists, especially as educators, researchers, and practitioners. We work with the young people, young students. What is resilience? A measure of the persistence of systems and their ability to absorb change, disturbance, and still maintain the same relationship between populations or state variables. So resilience means that you have just one brain, but your left brain works very rational. You know, you want to learn things properly, you want to follow the rules and norms, but then right brain, it says, hello, I want to be creative, I want to be more colorful. So within this combination, actually neuroscience is telling us resilience is very important to continue with the life. I'm working with Bangladeshi children in Australia currently. I'm working with the Bengali Community Language School in Perth currently. We have 20 students. I go there almost every weekend. I work with these children. And they are so amazing. They're learning English and also Bengali. Some of them were born in Australia, so they're learning Bengali as the second language, right? So I try to teach these children resilience. Right now, you're so innocent, you're so cute, you're so lovely, adorable. But in the future, you don't know what is coming. The work is a dark place. I don't say that. I just teach them, you have to be resilient. What is resilience, right? I work with them through the artworks. I ask them, can you please paint something that you really like? Sunset in Bangladesh. See, even if they were born in Australia, they still miss Bangladesh. They still want to be connected to their root and sense of belonging. So I'm going to do the exhibition when I go back on December the 6th. So we will be presenting some of these children's artworks to the Australian community. So this is resilience. So this is the community I work with. We have always do artworks. As you can see here, they are drawing the national flag, right? And then palm trees and houses. And they just love what they told me that, they love going back to Bangladesh, right? So I tell them, it's very important to learn your Bengali language. Never lose that side. This is part of who you are, right? And that is, your Bengali language and identity will teach you the resilience when you go into the real world, right? So this is what I mean is that as educators, we need to sort of provide our children, our students, this resilience and critical thinking. And also teachers as well. Teachers are emotional. Language teachers are emotional. We need to have that resilience. When I first started in Australia, as an international student from Mongolia, I didn't know what is resilience. I took everything personally. I didn't know, when I first came to Australia, I didn't know what is racism. And then in Australia, I didn't know what is racism. I didn't have any resilience about this because nobody taught me. I wish my teachers taught me in the classroom when I was younger in Mongolia. Now, this is a very important work by Shaila Sultana, by Zulfikar Haider, Mohammed Moniner, and Abdul Habib. Yeah, I hope they're all here. I read this book. This is an important book. It talks about resilience. It talks about ordinariness, just using different terms. But we're still talking about this. So in Bangladesh, you're already talking about this. You have a beautiful, resilient book. So I highly recommend this book to, continue this discussion. And yesterday, when I was looking at the graffitis, these also really touched my heart. Reform, resist, rebel, revolt. So I'm going to add to this resilience.